Hello, come in. Hi, nice to see you. Now, it is nice. We're just coming up towards Epiphany, which is, of course, in a sense, the end of the arc of the Christmas season. But also, of course, it's when we celebrate the arrival of the Magi, these the star-led wizards, as John Milton calls them. And Christmas is one of those seasons for which, happily, we have sets of sermons by Lancelot Andrewes. I think I showed you this before. You called this as one of the most treasured volumes in my library. This is a beautiful 1641 folio of the 96 sermons of Lancelot Andrewes. Anyway, they were the great sermons preached at court under King James. And of course, as I think I told you last time, he was in charge of making the authorised version, the King James version of the Bible, and obviously many translators were involved, but he was a great linguist and scholar and overall, but he was also a great preacher. I think before I showed you some of his sermons on Pentecost, but it happens that, I've marked this up, I hope, it happens that among the set of his Christmas sermons are a pair of sermons. They're not called Christmas sermons, they're sermons of the Nativity. Let me just show you I think I've shown you this before, but this is just so lovely. 96 sermons by the Right Honourable and Reverend Father in God, Lancelot Andrewes, late Lord Bishop of Winchester. I love the way these are printed, they're just so beautiful. And it was obviously published posthumously and dedicated to Charles I. Anyway, among the sermons preached on the Nativity are a pair of sermons on the Magi, and this is, Behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is the King of the Jews? That's his text, and this is how he's going to develop it. And it was preached on Christmas Day in, as you will see, 1622, Wednesday, 25th of December, 1622. So just shy of, 400 years ago. Anyway, he takes every single word of the text. T.S. Eliot said about him that he could take a word and derive the world from it. And he reflects on it. And he particularly in this sermon reflects on veni, the verb behind came. They came. How did they come? Where did they come from? In what circumstances did they come? And in the first half of the sermon, he develops that sense of the coming of the wise men. And then in the second half of the sermon, having written the first half in the third person, they came, he turns it around and says, what about us? How do we come? What kind of journey do we make to Christ? Anyway, he's talking here in this particular bit of the sermon, which I'd love to read to you, about what a difficult and dangerous journey it was. Secondly, we consider the way they came, be it pleasant or plain and easy, for if it be, so much the better. But this was nothing pleasant, for through deserts all the way is waste and desolate. And then he goes on to talk about the time of year, and this is wonderful. Last, we consider the time of their coming, the season of the year. It was no summer progress, a cold coming they had of it at this time of the year. Just the worst time of the year to take a journey, and especially a long journey in. The ways deep, the weather sharp, the days short, the sun furthest off in solsticio brumali, the very dead of winter. Venimus, we are come if that be one. Venimu, we are now come at this time, that sure is another. So it's a wonderful passage, and I mentioned T.S. Eliot as an appreciator of Andrewes. I wrote a great essay on Lancelot Andrewes, and those of you who, anybody that that knows and loves Eliot probably knows the Journey of the Magi and may have recognised an echo there. And in fact, it was only after I read it in the Andrews that I noticed, if you look at this, here's Eliot's Journey of the Magi. He just delicately puts a little single inverted comma between a cold and winter. I suppose doffing his cap obscurely and from a great distance to Andrews. But as you listen to that Andrews as I read it, you can hear the rhythm of it. These wonderful, short, sharp, staccato, rhythmic sentences. They're crying out to become a poem. I mean, all it required of Eliot to do was really to just stop the lines and arrange it. And there it was. It was already poetic prose. Now, you might say, here's Eliot stealing. Well, if you're going to steal from the best. But I don't want to put Eliot down in any way. In fact, I think Eliot did a brilliant thing, because what is really astonishing is Eliot's power to continue at Andrews's height and tenor and vigour and depth and extraordinary vividness of imagery. That's what Eliot does. I mean, somebody once accused Virgil of stealing lines from Homer, and he said, "Is it easy to steal the club from Hercules?" In other words, if you're going to take your point of departure from a great writer, it's going to be pretty bloody obvious if you're not a writer of the same calibre, because the quality will fall off very rapidly. And of course, the remarkable thing is that nobody for a long time even noticed what Eliot had done, because he continues it. But I would say more than that. Partly for my PhD, made a study of Eliot's relations with Andrewes. So I read the whole sermon and the sermon before it that goes with it, and saw what Andrewes was trying to achieve in it. And Andrewes' whole thrust at the end of that sermon is to turn the third person plural into the first person plural. That having said a cold coming, they had of it. He wants us to identify with the wise men and put ourselves in their place. And in fact, he makes a series of comments about how much easier it is for us to get to church than it was for them to get to Jerusalem and to Bethlehem, and we ought to follow their example. So anyway, I thought as we're coming to Epiphany, I would just read you the Journey of the Magi. I don't know if that's George at the door. Is George asking to come in? Or is it Zara? You coming in, girlie? Do you want to come in? We're just going to have a poem. Poor Zara's not been very well, so she's a bit thin and a bit sorry for herself, but there you go, girlie. Yes, lovely girl. You can do poetry. So anyway, let's hear Eliot's Journey of the Magi, shall we? Journey of the Magi. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of year for a journey, and such a long journey, the ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter, and the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out, and the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Then, at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on a low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information, So we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place. It was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence, and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, and had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. Oh, what an astonishing poem that is. So much to unfold and take out of it. I love the way as they gradually arrive, just the little details that we see through their eyes, all have a gospel resonance, which is not unfolded here at all, but is there for the reader and presumably much later on for the wise men themselves to have gathered. So the three trees under the low sky and the hands dicing for pieces of silver. And even the thing about the empty wineskins, which is of course Jesus is saying about new wineskins for new wine, that this is a completely new thing that is happening. Behold, says God, I do something completely new. See, I'm doing it now. And these old men, these Magi, have made their long journey to witness the birth of the new. And the deepest insight of all, that death itself will lead to a kind of birth, to resurrection, and the longing, as it were, on the part of the speaker for the resurrection in the end. It appears to be a longing for death, but it's a dying to the old in order to rise to the new. It's and hence the word glad in the last line. It's an astonishing poem, and I imagine, as it were, Andrewes and Eliot meeting at last in heaven, and I think Andrewes would be extremely pleased with this piece of work by Eliot, which is entirely in the spirit of his original sermon. Thanks for dropping by. Yes, you could go.